So I'm back with a new video that a few people have requested. What kind of gauge do I have up front? How do you install it? And just what do I recommend in general? So in this video, I'm gonna go over what gauge I have, how to install it, all the little features it has, and just how I'd recommend it. So up front is the KOSO TNT-04. It's an aftermarket speedo, tack, and a whole bunch of other things. I really recommend this one. It has a ton of features. It's worked incredible outside. I leave it outside all the time because I'm at an apartment, and Florida, tons of rain. So this thing's been through a whole lot of water and it's still running great. So I'll start off by going over some of the different features this gauge has. For starters, you can already tell that it's in neutral for both of these, but you'll also notice it says gear right there. While normally the Suzuki Katana does not have a gear indicator, this gauge is actually smart enough to recognize what gear you're in if you program it to. In the instruction manual, it'll ask you to go in first gear, ride it for a little bit, and then it'll tell you to switch gears. You then switch, and so on until you get to sixth gear, and it's done programming itself. What it does is it recognizes your RPM and your speed, and from then on, it'll just recognize, hey, it's going this RPM at this speed, I'm probably in this gear. To this day, I haven't had read it incorrectly even once. The only thing is, whenever you're switching gears, it'll initially read sixth gear for about a second or two. After that, it recognizes the gear, and every single time, it's been correct so far. So for all the additional features, you'll have to notice that I have this little button over here. You click this button when you want to program it or just run through the different features on this gauge. So I click it one time, it's got trip A, trip B, and then this over here, I have it set to go off every 3,000 miles, and one of these lights up here is going to go off, and just a reminder to do maintenance at 3,000 miles. So then I'll click it again, it's got the time. Then over here it has temperature. You can change it to Celsius or Fahrenheit, whatever you want. However, it does not normally come with a temperature sensor. You can get that online, and KOSO does in fact make one. I just didn't get one for it, and I never installed one. Next, it'll say 11.9 volts coming from the battery. Now over here is a really funny feature. It'll actually remember the highest speed and RPM you went to at that speed. It'll also recognize the gear, and if you have a temperature sensor involved, it'll tell you the temperature. However, if you don't have one, for whatever reason, it's just going to say 32. No idea why. Then it resets back to the odometer. A funny feature with the odometer is whenever you program this gauge, you don't just plug it in and then just leave it at 0 and then it builds up from there. You can actually tell it, hey, this bike already has X amount of miles on it, so you can already start with that. But this gauge will also recognize that you started at a certain amount. So if you go deeper into the settings on the gauge, you can actually recognize that you only used this gauge for so many miles instead of the entire thing that's on the odometer. So when you get the instructions for this gauge, you'll notice that it's a whole lot. It starts off by telling you how to install everything and all the different parts that it can come with, as well as the additional parts that you can get for it. This over here doesn't always come with the bike, neither does the temperature sensor over here. That being said, there are all of these parts on here. You definitely want every single one of them. Over here, it's going to tell you each wire you want to connect everything to, and on here you can see I've already kind of put what exists on the bike normally, and the only problem is my bike isn't going to be the exact same as yours. I had a ton of rodent damage on here. My wiring harness is far from original, so the wires that I'm using aren't going to be the exact same as the wires that are on your bike. That being said, a few of them still are going to be. When you're installing this gauge, I'd say most of the wires are fairly intuitive and where you connect them, as long as you just follow your wiring diagram for your bike and the instruction manual. However, a few of them, less so. So I'll be going over those specific ones and exactly what I did to get mine working properly. For me, the most annoying part of installing this gauge was installing the tachometer. The tachometer can be installed in 3 different ways, and I tried all 3, and the 3rd time it worked. Right over here, you can see there's option A, B, and C. Only one of them worked for me, however. What I did was I installed it by attaching the wire that comes from the gauge that's supposed to read the RPM, like the signal. I installed it pretty much directly to the signal generator. And you see the stator cover right over there. And what happens is the wire comes out over here, and there's these 3 wires right here. Then it goes all the way down here. You got the CDI. And then right down here, you can see where it plugs in the back. Over here, I have a white wire, which goes directly to my gauge. And then this black, and I think it might have been white originally, I'm not quite sure, that wire. So I just have it connecting in there. And that's exactly how I'm reading the RPM on this bike. When you're programming this, you'll realize just how many features this thing has. It takes almost a good day just to program the entire thing. And I'm not going to be going over all the features and how to work on all of it, but I'll be pointing out the parts you might be struggling in if you're trying to install this one. So right over here, you're going to press this button for about 3 seconds, and then boom, changes. First thing is going to be the clock. I'm going to press it 1 time to skip past it. So you can adjust the units, miles per hour, and degrees Fahrenheit. Then you have the illumination. So I'll start by working on the illumination and showing you how that works. So I held the button for 3 seconds while on that page, and right now the GR is flashing for, you guessed it, green. Switch to blue, cyan I guess, purple, and so on. I'm just keeping it on green because I just like it at green right now. Then you hold the button again for 3 more seconds, and now the next one is flashing. You can adjust exactly what you want it to be at, and I have mine right about here. So then I held it again for 3 seconds, and I'm back to the main switching between. And now I'm over here. Tire. I currently have my tire to set to this exact overall circumference. I'm going to be going over that in more detail later on. Next, you have the RPM. There's a few settings you need to adjust with it. For starters, how many times it pulses per revolution. Then you have gear over here, and this is quite annoying to actually work on. Only in this setting when you are trying to get it to recognize what gear you're in. So you have to have a nice clean straightaway when you're trying to set that up. Then over here is the fuel. I currently don't have a fuel sensor installed because mine rested solid and I couldn't be bothered to reinstall a new one. Over here, now we start having the warnings. So 8, 9, 10, there we go. Those last 3 are related to warnings and setting the odometer. So now regarding the tire circumference, which I mentioned earlier, you're definitely going to want to work on the tire circumference and get that correct well before you start getting the bike to recognize what gear it's in. What I did for my tire circumference was I first measured it. I put a string around the entire thing and then just measured how long the string was, and I got pretty close. That being said, once you have the tire circumference in there, now the bike can recognize how fast it's going because it measures each time it goes a full circle. I decided to use the GPS on my phone, and as I was riding, I'd say, hey, it's reading too fast, too slow. So then I would change my circumference of my tire to match my GPS. And eventually, I got it incredibly accurate. And once I got it to that point, I left it there, and now you're good to go. After that, then you can finally start working on your gear recognition and actually setting that up through the program and writing it to get it to recognize what gear it is. If you decide to do that first before you get your tire size dialed in, right when you change the tire size, you're immediately going to have to redo the gear indicator because it's no longer going to be recognizing the correct speed, so it's just going to reset itself and you're not going to have that working anymore. Since this speedometer functions by recognizing how many times the tire has done a full 360 degrees, it has to have a way to actually measure that. However, I had to actually do some customization to get mine to function properly. You have a wire that comes straight out from up here, and this is actually the wire right over here. And it goes down, and I have it routed right along through here until it gets all the way down here. So this right over here is the sensor. It is incredibly close to this bolt right over here. What it does is every single time it goes around, it'll sense, hey, this bolt is here, and it'll send a signal all the way up to the speedo and just recognize it's turned that many times. Within the settings as well, you do have to program how many bolts there are in here. So right now I have 2, 4, 5. There are 5 bolts, so every 5 signals that this thing generates, it's going to recognize a full 360 degrees, and it's going to compare that to the overall tire circumference, and that's how you get the speed. The customization I had to do was how I actually got this thing to fit on properly. This piece right over here, that does not seem to be aging amazingly, this came with the bike. However, this piece right over here did not. I'm pretty sure this used to be part of my garage door. Just some random metal I got. I bent it and I made a bunch of little 90-degree elbows just so it could hold this in place, and just so this can sit super close and right where I want it to be. You'll also notice that since this piece has a hole in the center, every single time it does a 360-degree turn, you don't want it to recognize 10 signals because of the gap. You want it to sit around like the edge, just so it doesn't recognize the center. It's just only sensing the edge. You'll also want it to be as close as possible to each bolt without actually touching it. You do that by adjusting the little set screw right up there, and you can move it in and out. And that's how I made mine function properly. I'll try to show you a little better angle of exactly what the bracket I made looks like. You see it goes down, and then it goes straight out, and then 90 degrees, and it comes straight out again, where it can then grab this bolt, and then you can adjust it up and down, and it has a little bit of play right and left. This is the one annoying thing, well, that's not true. This is the most annoying thing that you have to fabricate to actually make it function just to get the speed to work. And after you're able to make something to actually hold the speed sensor in place, you're good to go. The next thing I had to fabricate would be how the whole thing just attaches to the bike in general. The Suzuki Katana originally had all that stuff up front, which I threw away many years ago. Don't have any of that anymore because it's so crazy bulky. And I actually had to create something to hold it in place. So all this really shiny silver stuff, this came with the Speedo. However, everything else did not. I had to create something that goes all the way back in there, and as you can see, it fits inside of this. And back here, I don't have it actually fitting inside of it. I have it just sitting to the side, and it's being held in place by the washer. Same goes on the other side. Then I have the bracket that connects the two in the middle. Then I have an additional bracket that comes out from the center all the way up here, and I have a couple bins in it just so that it can kind of fit in properly. You'll also notice I have a whole bunch of washers up there acting kind of as a spacer. And yeah, end of the day I got it to work, and you don't really notice it too much because it's so low down. So I'll try to get a few close-ups on this just so you can get a decent look on exactly how I have the whole thing assembled. You'll also notice that the bolts are holding up pretty well, and this being original doesn't have any rust on it, so I'm assuming it's stainless as well. Everything else that I got for it is also stainless, of course, because Florida. But yeah, I think the whole thing's held up incredibly well so far, and I think these random pieces of metal probably a part of an old garage door as well. So I believe I've covered everything that you need to know before you purchase your KOSO TNT-04 gauge. I strongly recommend you get this one, not sponsored or anything. This is just an incredibly well put together gauge, and yeah, it just works amazing so far. You're gonna wanna have your own wiring diagram for your bike. As you can see, mine has been used very heavily. And whenever you get it, it comes with an instruction manual that, while incredibly long and complicated, is very worthwhile, and don't lose it. Even though mine is all put together and done, I'm gonna hold on to this forever because of all the different functions in here that I might want to tune and adjust later on. So an aspect I forgot to mention was how exactly you're gonna fit this button on here. Normally, you're not gonna have so much space on your bars just to fit extra stuff, including this phone mount right over here. So what I decided to do a long time ago, which is also the whole reason I'm able to have these bar end mirrors, was get rid of the original bars. I actually got a completely straight bar online and I just decided to cut it in half, and I installed one side over there and the other side right over here. Another thing is you'll notice the original bars, they're completely plugged up over here and it's welded in with like a plug. You can't just drill it out. It's in there that good. So you can't have bar end mirrors on your Suzuki Katana if you have the original handlebars in there. So I would just really recommend getting rid of them if you want to have bar end mirrors, or if you just want to have extra space to put more things on it. Now that the video is over, just a few little extra things. If there's any mistakes I made, just any amendments or extra things I think I should add later on after this video is posted, check the video description. I'm always making corrections or just adding extra little tips in there. If there's a video you'd like me to make concerning some aspect of this bike, leave it in the comments and I might just be able to get around to it one day. Problem is I'm in flight school at the moment and I'm just in between instrument and commercial. So right now I have some time off, but next week, back at it again. Just one other little extra thing you guys might be interested if you have this bike. Where do you put your insurance and registration? There isn't really a convenient spot to put everything. For me, however, I came up with one solution. A while back, I completely redid the seats. There was pieces missing and it was horrible. You can see all the rivets I put in. But this is where I put everything. It's a fireproof, waterproof bag. It's got the little zipper right over here. And I put 2 rivets right here. And I actually have a nail here and the same on the other side just to hold it in place. But waterproof, fireproof, just perfect for insurance and registration. And just always on the bike. You also need a key to pull off the seat, so it's not going anywhere either.